Hello, story seekers. I'm Nico.
I'm Ben, and you're listening to The Tiny Bookcase.
Welcome to this Right Like episode.
As you know, in these episodes we talk about famous and infamous writers whilst tackling prompts in their honour.
Style, structure, or tone, we intend to see what happens when we borrow from the greats.
Our writer today was a Belfast-born lay theologian, academic, and author. His most famous work involves a lion, a witch, and a wardrobe.
He once wrote that you should write about what really interests you, whether it's real things or imaginary things, and nothing else. And without a doubt, we must be talking about C.S. Lewis.
It's quite a nice quote, that.
I like it, yeah.
It's got a nice through line for it for like a fairly self-punishing Irish Protestant. That's a rather lovely thing to say.
Also, tell me you're an academic without telling me you're an academic.
Yeah.
There's writing about the things that interest you. I feel like this is probably something he could have said to Tolkien. Stop writing about elves and write about languages, you silly boy.
Yeah, he's their friendship is obviously quite defining in terms of the way that we've interacted with C.S. Lewis as adults. I think because
Yeah.
I think we're both of a very similar vein where we read or were read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe a lot as a and the Narnia Chronicles as a kid.
Yes.
Because I know that I was read Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe at least once, and then I have since read it and read a bunch of them on my own. Like I think Voyage of the Dawn Treader was like one of my like very early books that I got really into on my own.
So I had, as books on tape, I had The Magician's Nephew
Oh, that's a banging one.
and Prince Caspian.
Yeah, I like those old. I remember those books on tape because they added sound effects, and it was the first books on tape that I had that had sound
Yes.
effects in them. And like the waves and stuff in Dawn Treader and Caspian and yeah, just all that stuff. It's definitely a big part. And then later on, obviously, you read Tolkien,
Yeah.
and then when you're a bit older, perhaps you might find out that they were like close buddies, and then part of a little writing circle, and it all starts to make sense a little bit. Um,
I did not realise it was Jesus stuff when I was a little kid.
no, I
Even
don't.
though I was going to Catholic school and
You're not supposed to. I think as a child, like they're written for children,
yeah.
and they are veiled allegories. Like there are some people that say that you can discuss Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and Narnia without talking about Christianity, and
Yeah.
I think those people are a bit silly.
Well, yeah.
Like if you're gonna have an actual like if you're not just obviously if you're just gonna like basically talk about just plot, then maybe you can. But if you're gonna talk about like the meaning of things or why things happen, what drives the characters,
I mean,
what's happening inside the world building.
even just plot, a big portion of the plot is that their Jesus allegory dies and comes back to life.
Sure, yeah, but like I guess you would have to be doing such a simplistic reading of that to not even begin to talk about it. But
They
simple as
hard
what,
reset Aslan.
yeah, yeah. But like children, I don't think you're supposed to be like, oh, this is Jesus as a child. Like
Yeah.
he wrote it for children, so it's got all of that audience awareness in it, and it does hang together as its own story without the Jesus stuff. It as soon as you start discussing why things happen, it's immediately you
I
just
know
point
it
to the
was.
big cross.
I know it was a point of contention with Tolkien, and it has actually come up for us. We to explain, listeners. I built a playlist for a tabletop role play we were doing, and I sort of bunged the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe soundtrack on there because there's some good songs. Forgot that there's a song called Father Christmas
Yeah,
for that bit when Santa turns up for some reason that Tolkien had begged C.S. Lewis not to put in the book, and it absolutely derailed that
what
role play.
we were doing, yeah, it fucking trashed it because it played like three times, like we couldn't get rid of it.
Yeah, I don't know
Um,
why.
it must have been because it was on the queue. But anyway, the I know that Tolkien got really angry about that. They had quite differing opinions on religion. Like
Yeah,
C.S. Lewis grew up an Irish Protestant, became an atheist at about 15, and then rediscovered it later on and became an extremely prominent like lay theologian. So he did like lots of like broadcasts and radio recordings
yeah.
of his thoughts on these kind of things. So he really, really was very serious about it. And even today, like I checked the official C.S. Lewis website, it's all full of his Christian stuff. And then on the other hand, talking to Catholic,
Yeah.
so they had quite differing opinions. And eventually, I think it did lead to them falling out, didn't it?
Yes. I
They
believe so.
completely lost contact, didn't they? But for a little snippet of time, there was C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, and I forget the third guy's name, in a pub somewhere discussing their early drafts of Lord of the Rings and Narnia.
Genre-defining books. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, which is amazing.
Have you read much Lewis beyond Narnia?
No, I'm aware that there is there's some science fiction which I've been meaning to read for a very long time, and if my to read pile wasn't tottering next to me, I would already have gone for it. But
I s-
my uncle is he's sort of fairly well up on C.S. Lewis, and
yeah.
apparently there's also a movie called Shadowlands that came out.
No.
It's got Anthony Hopkins in it and stuff. It's I think it was in the 80s or 90s or something, and that kind of really amped up C.S. Lewis's like current perception and awareness of him.
Oh, okay. I
Yeah,
didn't know
I've
about
been
that one.
meaning. I almost watched it in advance of this, but it's about really we're about writing, not movies. So I
Yeah.
didn't in the end. So
It's it's a funny one because I haven't read anything outside of Narnia, and my Narnia books were passed down to a sibling, and then passed off to a nephew, and then they've gone on to a different niece,
yeah,
and I had a lovely little box set of all seven that used to frustrate me as a child because the suggested order on the side wasn't what I considered the correct order for the stories. And that's another thing that's a point of contention for people, isn't it? What order you're supposed to read the Chronicles of Narnia in.
yeah. It's
A
probably
lot of
the first
people,
one of those arguments that actually I was aware of. Like
yeah,
apart from possibly Discworld, maybe.
yeah.
Like everyone's got their own opinions on that one as well.
But that's a lot wider. There's a lot more Discworld and a lot more threads.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't know how anybody could want to start anywhere other than the Magician's Nephew because it creates the world.
I mean, I will take the opposing view here. Like, I think children should start with the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I think that's that's the intro into the book world for sure. I understand talking about world building and stuff, and I think from
Yeah,
like an objective standpoint, that is correct. But if I had a child and they were about ready to read Narnia, I probably would give them Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe first.
I thought we should. We're going to start our own one. Should we start our own version? You start with the horse and his boy, then the silver chair, then Voyage of the Dawn Treader.
The Silver Chair is the one that I have that's the oldest copy because it's passed down to me through my uncle.
Yeah.
And all the other ones are from when I was a kid, whereas that one's like predates that by a long way.
Oh wow.
Um, it does raise an interesting question, like, would you pass it on? Like, because we were talking about Christ analogies and stuff. Do you like? I'm not entirely sure I would immediately pass on C.S. Lewis. Like, do I want this worldview to soak into a young mind?
I think you can be selective with it. I think like Caspian is a really good story on its own,
Hmm.
and characters like Reaper Cheap are great characters, and I want those kind of characters in the future, but not necessarily. I do think the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is too preachy, and that one maybe you could skip.
It is like kid crack, isn't it?
Yeah,
So, like it's so overwhelmingly filled with like a sense of place and mood. It's
also
very like it's very difficult not to get like completely bushwhacked by the religious stuff that's in it.
also Turkish delight is such a rare sweet now that I wonder how long it would take to explain to a child what it
What it is.
was when Edmund demands it.
Yeah, I can't stand it, man. I really don't and don't see why it's a thing.
I like it.
I like it's okay, but it's like it's not. Well, I look at it and I'm just like, why does this exist? And
Why
then I
does
eat
this
some.
how does
I'm
this
like,
earn the name delight?
yeah, what? Yeah, there's nothing delightful about this shit.
Turkish mild pleasure. I've
Turkish,
been there.
it's okay. Oh, yeah. So I'm not sure I would pass it on just because I feel like it's for myself. I feel like that's a fairly dangerous ideology.
Yeah.
Um, and this is where these kind of things get you. Like they get you when you're most open, you're most vulnerable, and they're the things that make people later in life be like, "Why did you do that?" To the people that are looking after them and caring for them. Like I know so many people that have been roughed up by having a religious upbringing,
Yeah.
and even in the mildest sense of giving them a cool book to read, because I do like A Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Um, I don't think I'd do it. I don't think I'd inflict it until a bit later when they can actually
Make an informed decision.
exactly, yeah. But yeah, anyway, started up strong up top here.
Say it didn't work on me because I was apparently the first child at my Catholic school to ever request the part of Pontius Pilate in our Easter performance. So.
Oh, the whew, that is spicy. Did they give it to you?
Yeah, I
Nice.
just wanted to say I wash my hands of you.
Just like that's the coolest line in this whole thing.
Yeah.
So I'm having it. You didn't quite have the body for Jesus then at that
Oh
age.
no, I wasn't shredded enough for the
You
cross, my
couldn't
man.
get ripped to bits and to be able to hang from a frame for that amount of time. Oh, right, we should probably get started with some stories. Now people are
Oh,
probably done with my anti-proselytizing. Um, the the prompt is going to be Voyage because we like to take them from the titles of the authors that we're dealing with. And Nico, you'll be going first, so after you.
very well. There were two boys, whose names were Michael and Joshua, who had had many adventures together, though those will not be the content of this tale. Instead, this tale tells of a time in which the two undertook a great voyage. Michael had always wanted to go to London, but had spent all of his boyhood days so far in Oxford. Joshua had been to a great many places, quietly in the back of his father's motor car, and knew London to be a most excellent place. A book they'd found in the school library had a wonderful collection of maps inside, and with a great deal of finger tracing, Michael had come to the conclusion that were they to follow the River Isis, or Thames as the world outside of Oxfordshire would call it, then they would come upon London in what seemed no time at all. Joshua was unsure, not of the river's course, for this was plain to see, but instead of the wisdom of the thing. But Michael pleaded with him. He did not want to go anywhere, least of all London, without Joshua, who he'd kept as his firm companion in all other endeavours. After some time, and a little persuading, Joshua agreed that they would sail together to London. Joshua's father was a woodworker, and Joshua knew where he kept his tools and wood. He told Michael, I cannot take them. It's not in my nature. And Michael said, Then I shall do it. It's only a small amount of nails, a hammer, and some wood. We shall be fine. He was sure of this. Never had an adventure filled him with such excitement before it had even begun. So, one night, Michael crept, and he took what he could carry, which was a fair deal. Young boys who are prone to adventuring are strong and excellent at improvising their way around problems. So it was he tied his knapsack just so, and slung it around his shoulder so it could bear the weight of the wood, and hurried into the night. Michael knew he could find the rest of the parts of the ship at home, and if he did it quickly enough, Mother wouldn't notice. He took the handle from the broom, the great length of washing line that clung at one end to the house and the other the fence, right to the back of the garden. He lastly took a vast sheet from the linen cupboard, for what is a ship without a sail, and took his things to the garden to begin preparations. A promise had been made between the boys that as soon as he could, Joshua would join Michael, but this was going to be a great many hours. So Michael filled that time with a great banging of nails and tying of lines and hanging of sails, until he had what he thought to be quite the respectable craft. You shall need a name, he mused to himself while looking upon his handiwork. Your name shall be Voyager. Michael was as pleased with the name as he was with the ship, and was pleased even further when the first light of daytime began to creep over the closed eyelids of earth and wake her for a new day. Right on time, with the sun's dawning, came Joshua, packed in his little hamper sack for an adventure. but looking a little worried in the face. As they carried Voyager to the river, Michael asked him, "What's the matter, Joshua? Normally when we go on adventures, you're filled with joy, but not this morning, when we undertake our greatest adventure of all." Joshua thought for a moment, and then he spoke. "This one feels different to our other adventures, friend." "Well, you needn't come if you don't want to," said Michael, in a little bit of a huff. He'd worked ever so hard on Voyager for Joshua to now begin belly aching about the whole endeavour. "Of course I will come, Michael. Everywhere you go, I'll be with you, as long as you accept my company there. Your actions here do unsettle me somewhat, but I still love you." This was satisfactory for Michael, who understood what it was like to get the willies. "I love you too, friend," he said, and with his mind now firmly on the river and the corned beef sandwich in his meagre pack, for he had stayed up very late, so late in fact that tomorrow had snuck up on him. But adventure waits for no one, and Michael knew that missing one night of dreams was a fair trade for seeing the great city of London. So they found themselves at the river's edge, and Voyager was set upon the water, where she floated most majestically. Michael hopped aboard, but Joshua stayed a moment. "Michael, if you want, you could ask my father to take us in his motorcar to London," he said. Michael was shocked and a little sad. He said, "I've made us a ship. If you're afraid of the journey, then do not come with me. You're my closest friend, Joshua, and I love you, but I've made up my mind on this thing. I must see London." And Joshua was sad, because he knew the dangers of water, but he'd promised he would always be by his friend's side. Gently he stepped onto the raft. The sheet was unfurled, and with some paddling of their hands, the River Thames began to carry them. It was exciting to be on the water, so free, far freer than the land makes one feel. Michael felt like a ship's captain. He could sail anywhere. He was Admiral Nelson. The world was his. For the first time that he remembered, he was in charge of his own destiny. But destiny often has other plans for the adventurers. As the river grew wider and the sun began its climb overhead, the nails began to loosen as the wood became wet. The knots that Michael had copied from a drawing of a ship began to loosen. With a great whooshing whip, the sail, caught in a breeze, betrayed Michael and took flight. Suddenly he felt very small and frightened. He'd never been taught how to swim, and realized now that he did not know how to. "Joshua! Joshua, I'm scared!" he called to his friend, who stood very still at the edge of their breaking ship. "As am I, my friend. But I kept my promise. I came with you. That's all we can do in these situations, is keep our promises to one another," said Joshua, a wonderful soothing calm to his voice. "Oh, Joshua, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Forgive my foolishness," begged Michael, as he felt the boards come away beneath him. The two boys splashed helplessly in the churning current. "I forgive you, Michael. You were brash, yes, and foolish, but all is forgiven. I will keep my promise. We will take all our adventures together, for eternity." And Michael felt himself pulled beneath the water, his sandwich and knapsack all gone, his clothes logged with water he did not know the right way to kick. And so he drowned. But Joshua was true to his word, and forgave Michael his transgressions. And they took all of their adventures together, from London to Timbuktu, to the great palaces of India, to the scorched earth of the Australias, for all of eternity.
What the hell? What the fuck was Joshua?
He's Jesus, baby!
Oh, I see. I wasn't sure whether he was like an angel or something.
He could be an angel.
But there were like, the description at the end of like the two boys splashed helplessly in the water and stuff. It was like, but is he actually a boy or what's happening? So it was like a Christian Fight Club.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Yeah, I like it. About children drowning.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, interesting. I quite liked it. I feel like I'm not the target audience for that story.
I don't
obviously.
think I'm the target
I know
audience
that
for
you
that
are
story.
either. Yeah, I could sort of feel it in the way that you were telling the story. There was one actual hard bit of feedback. The when you're describing the boat coming apart, you used the word loosen twice about two different things.
Oh,
I would change the second one about the ropes to something
yes.
else. But yeah, other than that, it hangs together. The word choice is excellent. A couple of interesting similes and stuff in there as well, which I quite liked. But I
The
definitely felt like your heart wasn't in that one.
the style,
Yeah.
Lewis's style, at least for me, was crippling. That's how I
What
would describe it.
in a sort of
It's
like a children's story, you mean? Or
I mean, no, no, we've written children's stories before and had a lot of fun
yeah,
with them, but it's his language is always very plain and direct, and it. I guess that's why his allegories are so obvious when you come back to them as an adult, because he just kind of just says exactly what everything is, and that makes it, especially in a short form, quite difficult to get anything kind of joyful or exciting out of the story, or at least it did for me.
yeah, like just you feel hobbled sort of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's difficult. Like as you say, like the simplistic, deliberately simplistic word choice. The I think you actually very accurately got that kind of like condescending tone as well
yes,
that he does. I think yours was a little more aggressively condescending to the reader and the character.
very
But
probably.
but it is still there. It's something that is in C.S. Lewis's writing for
Yeah.
sure. Um, so in terms of like writing, like I think that's worked. Um, it read like someone who was quite angry about the way that C.S. Lewis writes. And I can sort of see why. Like, I think it's incredibly outdated. I mean, we grew up with Philip Pullman,
We did, yes.
who is the antithesis of C.S. Lewis. He is the like self-avowed opposite. He thinks that the Chronicles of Narnia are propaganda in the cause of religion,
Yeah.
and goes on about how it's one of the most ugly and poisonous things he's ever read. So I feel like there was some Philip Pullman in the way that you approach that, and I can totally understand why. And I may have done the same thing.
Oh
Uh,
no.
we'll have to see. Obviously, very different approaches that we've taken, but we'll see
Yeah.
what happens in mine. But yeah, there's a quote from Pullman as he says that it's propaganda in the service of a life-hating ideology, which is monumentally disparaging of girls and women and and shows a sadomasochistic relish of violence.
Good grief.
I know he really went for it.
He's not wrong
Interestingly,
though.
no, he's not wrong. Death is better than life. Boys are better than girls. Light-colored people are better than dark-colored people, and so on. Says
Yeah.
Pullman. It's pretty damning,
Yeah.
and it's a rather interesting one because we've dealt with authors before who have done some really atrocious shit in their personal lives, and from what I can tell, I don't think C.S. Lewis did, but he may have committed uh, some sort of mental crimes with the way that he imposed this
Well, yeah.
kind of Christianity on people through Chronicles of Narnia. Like generations, in particular, of British children have read this, and it but we can't lay all the blame for that at his feet. It's there's a there's a much larger villain at play here, which is the concept of organized religion, in particular
Yeah,
Christianity.
why not? Why not, eh? Right, while you're on a roll, should we have your
Yeah,
story?
I'll start swinging. Okay, here we go. Voyage. Kushim swallowed the last pill. He hated to do it without gel, but he, along with the rest of the crew, was trying to conserve every drop they had brought with them. The pill clung to his throat, and he coughed to force it down. His cough was echoed throughout the ship as the others chosen for the mission did the same. Despite being given the entirety of the survivors' remaining supply of spore pills, they had run out. Not only that, but they were running out of gel, rations, and most importantly, time. It had been 60 days since their home ship had failed in orbit. 60 days since they had used the escape pods. 60 days of trying to find a way back to the stars. Of the 200 people who had escaped the crash, Kushim and 39 others had been chosen to pursue their only hope of escape. He grimaced at that thought and wiped sweat from his face, massaging the muscles beneath the skin with strong fingers. Kushim left his sleeping area and climbed the wooden ladder to the deck. The hatch was already open above him, so Kushim pulled himself onto the deck and stood up with unaffected grace in the buffeting wind. A small pain in his hand drew his attention to the splinter sticking out of the skin between his thumb and palm. He pulled it with his teeth and spat it out over the side railing, where the roaring waves snatched it away. He waved the bloody palm at Adamak, who was pressing his weight through the steering tiller. The grim chuckle the man gave in reply was lost to the wind. Theirs was a ship unlike any built by their people for 100 generations. A sailing boat, fashioned from the trees of the planet they had found themselves uncomfortably reliant on. The complex metallurgy of the vessel they had travelled the spaceways with had been replaced with rough wood bouncing on salt water. The engineers that had kept their ship in order before the crash had turned their disgraced talents to the construction of the wooden ship that pitched and yawed beneath Kushim. The necessity of the construction was clear. They must recover what could be salvaged from their home ship before it was lost to the oceans of this planet. As the navigator, Kushim had used his last few seconds aboard the home ship to plot its impact trajectory. Once they had recovered all of the escape pods that had jettisoned, he had turned to the stars to develop rudimentary navigation. Kushim had no doubt he could guide them to where the home ship had plunged beneath the waves. The spore pills they took with them would keep all of their memories and their ancient minds intact for as long as possible. He dreaded to think how quickly those they had left behind on the shore would degenerate into simple beings, with only one lifetime's worth of memories to draw upon. "There is an island ahead," Adamak shouted over the sea. "With any luck, the ship will have hit it, and we won't have to dive." Kushim nodded to where the retrofitted escape pod sat on the deck, the only piece of metallic construction on the tub. "Look around," said Adamak. "I think we might be due some luck." The rest of the crew boiled up through the hatch and set to trimming the sails they had fashioned from the fabrics that remained to the survivors. The sailing ship lurched as the sails caught full billow, and Kushim felt their speed increase. The island was a large shadow initially, before resolving into a greenery-covered series of rocky bluffs belted by wide strips of golden sand as they drew nearer. The draft of their hull allowed them to get within swimming distance of the shore, and Kushim went with the second group to make the swim. He emerged salt-soaked onto the sands and climbed one of the bluffs to see that the stories of the first group were true. The island was much larger than they had thought, with a verdant interior filled with life, but no home ship. Evim led the meeting that night, on the deck whilst the ship pulled gently at its anchor. She spoke eloquently of their dire situation, and of how their rations and gel were spent. They must decide whether to press on or use the island's resources and establish a camp from which Kushim could lead the search of the nearby ocean. He listened as the vote was tallied, but already knew that the fear of death would manifest as pragmatism. Over the next 30 days, Kushim strove to find the signs of their home ship as Evim's camp grew. Every time he returned and shared their food, he found that a gulf was opening between them. Those that remained began to deify the land, and their enthusiasm for his search waned as the simplistic beauty of the island began to fill their shrinking minds. Each time, fewer and fewer were willing to come aboard the leaking ship to scour the waters with him. They became resentful of what they saw as a drain on their time and resources. Kushim reminded them at every meeting that he was seeing through the decision of the larger council. But he began to realize his companions were becoming something else, something little different to the apes they had come down to this planet to research. The sea was calm on the 91st day since their home ship had failed in orbit. Kushim could no longer remember the first 400 years of his life. He had been trying all morning to recall the name of his mother, but he knew it was lost. His mind, bereft of the spore pills, could only conjure the last 30 years of memory. He wondered whether he should mourn the understanding of the universe he had lost. A flash of silver beneath the turquoise surface of the becalmed ocean drew his eyes, and he felt a thrill of discovery thrum through him. "Adamak! There! We must dive!" The large man stared at him for a long moment, and Kushim, who had expected his excitement to be mirrored back at him, instead felt as though he were looking at a rock wall. "Will you help me lower the diving bell?" he asked, no longer certain of Adamak's support. The big man nodded. "As long as we're back home tonight." Home is there! Cushing pointed to the sea's surface, and Adamak scowled. Begrudgingly, Adamak and the few crew that Cushing had forced to come along hoisted the repurposed escape pod off the deck. Cushing clambered inside the makeshift diving bell and signalled through the small window that he was ready. The boom arm swung him out over the side of the ship, and he heard the man-powered winch begin to lower him. The weight of the bell dragged him through the surface of the sea, and Cushing stared out of the small window. He peered to see any further glimpses of their lost home ship. In his mind, he was already thinking of all the ways he could recover them all from the situation, with but a few of the tools or supplies that might have survived the impact. The bell juddered and bounced. Cushing felt the steadiness of his descent be replaced with a freefall. Around him, the ocean seemed to be sucked inside the bell, and he was smashed against the window. As the water filled his lungs, Cushing saw the long metal curves of their home ship glint softly in the glimmering refractions of sunlight. Adamak, replacing his knife on his belt, gave the order to return home. They would see what a forever of tomorrows would bring on their new planet.
God damn.
Mm.
So I really enjoyed the concept of that story. But
Yeah.
again, I could feel your frustration through the writing.
Yeah, I think my frustration was slightly different to yours because
It was kind of broader and more placed in
yeah,
the realities of that kind of dogmatic
I think
thinking. I think.
I was becoming too preachy. So I was being preachy the other way.
Yeah,
Like I wrote it with this idea that I was going to turn um, Lewis's propaganda style on its head and
yeah,
instead make it like a fairly damning, a damning sort of indictment of what faith does to humanity.
yeah,
Because obviously in this scenario, they are, sailors of the universe. They are and a very advanced species, capable of living for hundreds of years because of some sort of spore pill. And as they lose that memory of a long life and their intelligence, they begin to become more and more reliant and just like want smaller lives.
yeah,
And the island obviously represents the safety of organized religion. Like they can just stay there.
yeah.
They don't have to think about anything. They can just stay there, and they'll live and they'll survive. But Cushing and I feel like me as the author there are strongly pushing that they are going to lose something by doing that. They're going to lose knowledge. They're going to lose advancement. They
Yeah.
they even sort of lose their their organizational structure in terms of the government and stuff like it.
Yeah.
And he's the only one that's still trying to. He's like the heretic. He's going out to try and continue this quest to get them home to re. His is a pursuit of knowledge and progression in the future.
Yeah.
Everybody else is quite happy to just be on the
Stagnate.
island.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There were some
Yeah.
lovely little descriptions in it. The description of
Mm.
how the like coughing to loosen up the pill stuck in his throat at the beginning, that was really
Mm.
evocative.
Yeah.
That pulled me straight in.
Right at the start, yeah. Everyone has felt that I think at some point, so it does help to just
It's hay
drag
fever
people in.
season, so yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Those
Um,
tiny little hay fever pills feel gigantic when you're not not able to swallow it.
but there's something about like trying to do this kind of simplistic wording whilst trying to express complex stuff
Yeah.
that does lead it to become quite flat. I feel. I don't.
I think I think I know what you mean. It's the areas where you would normally add your little swirls and maybe, bosh on your fleur de lis. That's kind of taken away from you, and it's no. So say the thing, right now. Move on and say the next thing.
Mm,
That's certainly how it felt when I was doing it, and
yeah.
personally in my writing rely on those kind of strange comparisons that I make. That I try and be evocative of kind of a sense of the thing rather than actually the thing. So comparing the taste of an apple to Slug's Dream or whatever, whatever mad shit I'm on that day, you just can't. You can't do it in this style. And maybe that is tied to the religious element of it. They don't want you being too thinky.
I don't think that is tied to the. I think that's just how he happened to go for it.
Fascinating that he would be that close with Tolkien when they're that far apart in terms of the ideology of writing.
Well, we were when we were talking about Philip Pullman earlier, that he actually does like talk about like a comparison between the two at one point.
Yeah.
He said that this is a bit of a longer quote, but he said that they were often bracketed together, Tolkien and Lewis, because they were great friends, both Oxford writers, scholars, blah blah blah, both Christians. But so Pullman reckons that Tolkien's work has very little interest to a reader of literature. So he's sort of going down the genre route here, I think, Philip Pullman. So he's saying that because there are no women in Lord of the Rings, he's left half of humanity out, so it can't be of interest.
Right.
There's no question of like sexual relationship in Lord of the Rings and stuff, whereas like that kind of stuff is still just about in Lewis's writing. So it's an odd way to look at stuff because I did like the Narnia Chronicles when I was a kid, and I obviously loved Lord of the Rings, but you do have to reckon with the fact that they were both very heavy Christians. And
I mean, they're the archetypal old white dudes, aren't they? As well,
they are the old white dudes.
Yeah. I have a good fact about the Chronicles of Narnia. So Lucy, one of the four children in the story, is based on, I believe this is his godniece. This is Lucy's godniece.
Okay.
And when he wrote the first draft, he sent it to her parents to read to her, and said, give me any feedback if there's anything she doesn't like or anything you can think of. And the mum sent it back with a load of notes every time that the child was doing something unsafe in the book. So, like, the biggest part was that he would describe that she would shut the cupboard behind herself when she went in. And she said, the notes was, honestly, you're going to have children starving to death in cupboards. You need to do something about this. So if you now read the book, there are loads of bits where it will say, Lucy climbed into the wardrobe and, very carefully making sure the door was kept open because it's very unsafe to lock oneself in a cupboard, she went further in. And all because of that feedback from his friend.
I mean, that's fair enough, I guess. Like,
yeah,
you do hear about like children like locking themselves in freezers and all that kind of shit in the States. There's like chest freezers.
Yeah. I just wanted to be ham.
Yeah, it's. I think that does gel with the sort of the pragmatic way that Lewis approached writing. Like, I think possibly we would be like, I take your point, but at the the fact that he just inserted it is quite, I don't know, like it's almost like lacking in artfulness, isn't it?
Like finesse.
Yeah. It's not. He was just like, oh shit, and then just did a like find and replace.
it was a happy now away from.
Yeah. Oh, fun fact though. I like that. But there's something about because I remember quite clearly, the feeling of being inside that book and being like traveling through that wardrobe, like pushing through those coats. And that's got nothing to do with the religion that he puts in his book, but it has everything to do with the mood that he creates.
Wonder, yeah.
Yeah, and he does that beautifully. And I feel like we both failed to do that today.
Oh, absolutely.
Like we didn't.
I'm not happy with the story.
No, I'm not happy with mine either. And I think I don't actually know how to get for my writing to go through Lewis's pathway to get to that wonder.
Yeah.
And I had a bit of a go, but I think I was too angry. So it's the atmosphere that he develops in the Narnia books that's actually the true like gem of Lewis's writing. I think that's the reason he's persisted.
It stays with you, doesn't it? Like
it does. Yeah.
You can picture the lamppost with the snow, and you and I, you've been a Cambridge person for longer than me, but I was there for a few years, and you walk past Reality Checkpoint on Parker's Piece, which is a singular lamppost in the middle of a green field for everyone who's never been there. and every time I remember, every single time I think about Narnia.
Yeah,
So
he
he
does.
did
He's one
something
of the
right.
yeah, and because you are sort of exposed to him at a very very early age, I think he is one of the first authors that does lead people to begin to sort of look for where reality is cracked at the edges, like
Yeah,
thinking about the possibilities from something as simple and mundane as a wardrobe.
yeah.
It's imaginative and it's wonderful in the sense that it has wonders, and it makes you feel that sense of awe and atmosphere. So I can't continually fault him. Like I feel like I approach this in a very preachy way, but like preachy in the sense of from an atheist. You know, like doing exactly the same kind of propaganda thing that I've criticized him for. So I feel bad about the way that I've approached this story, but I did it
I
and I've performed it.
Yeah, I think I did the same with the whole look, and one of them was Jesus. There, suck it.
Yeah,
Like
there's
we know
we
how that works, but
yeah. So I
I had
go on.
a concept before to do it, but have it, a bit more in my style. So to have jokes in it and
Mhm.
have it be one of them go, oh Jesus Christ, what? No, nearly blowing his cover and
Yeah, that could
well,
work.
that would be more fun for me. Is that then too far away? And I think that is part of the fun of these write like challenges is that
True.
sometimes you just can't write like a person.
No, I mean, I think if I was to swing it again, I would look for that sense of wonder. I would leave everything else at the door. I'd leave all of my, my personal convictions at the door, and I would
Yeah,
just try and develop that because I think that's something that's actually, if you can slot that into your books and your short stories and reach for it as a tool, like being able to just generate that sense of wonder in people and like excitement about the possibilities of things.
yeah.
That's powerful. That's a useful thing to be able to do. Um, so I would try and do that, but
So
hopefully it was interesting listening to us try and maybe get a little bit angry and get in our own ways a little bit. Uh,
I've got a verging on apocryphal for you.
oh, you've got a Virgin Mode
I
Apocryphal. I
do
like
have
it.
a verging on apocryphal. It's that time again.
Love it.
So apparently, C.S. Lewis and his brother Warney had one joint in their thumb, not two,
What?
right? And it meant that they were bad at throwing, catching, and hitting balls.
What about writing?
Listen, this is where it gets good. As a result of his failure on the playing field, young Lewis was subjected to ridicule and abuse from the other students at school and made to feel unworthy to draw breath.
What?
But apparently, he was very athletic.
So he
So
was
he
a
would,
like a suicidal kid because of his thumb.
yeah.
Fucking wild.
But he apparently, yeah, would ride his bike or go walking for like 20-mile walks every day. And
Huh. How interesting. I've never even heard of that as a like a birth defect or whatever.
yeah, it's which one's missing, do you reckon?
I can only assume, if it's catching, like both would fuck you up. Like, how would you even grip things? I don't like it's what makes humans human to a certain degree, isn't it? A
Yeah.
thumb. Um, how would
He's
you
an
place
ape, a
ball?
wild ape.
A wild ape.
Let's see if I can find.
Yeah, I want to see pictures of C.S. Lewis's hands now. But like, how would he grip a pen? It
It
must
looks
be.
so. If you're looking at your thumb, listener, you've got the bit where it connects to the palm, and then you've got this bit sort of where it folds in the middle. It looks to be the bit where it folds in the middle that's just fused.
So a fused joint. Wild.
I can't even make my thumb do what his would do.
No, I'm just trying to do it. Like I'm just staring at my hand trying to. Imagine how bad he'd be at video games.
Or like weirdly good, something we don't know.
Oh yeah, it'd
Can
be like a
press
mad
three
like
buttons at once.
yeah, he's like a Street Fighter wizard. Like he's
There's no way he's making quarter turns on a stick with a thumb like that.
he just puts it in the middle of his palm and rotates. Shoryuken.
I don't know why I turned him into Cornholio. That's what the C stands for in C.S. Lewis.
Oh, so I
It's
think if there are,
Cornholio Street Fighter Lewis. There we go.
I think if there are like fans of C.S. Lewis's writing style, then I think we possibly do owe them an apology because I think we did. I think we butchered him a little bit today.
Oh god, yeah.
But I think I did learn something. And I will attempt to keep my anti-organized religion um anger out of my writing, because I think it turns it into quite a 2D flat mess.
I think that's you should let your writing call on your feelings and your memories, but I don't think you should let them lead it unless you're doing
Yeah.
something biographical.
Yeah, true.
I think if you let how you feel about things come in too heavily, they are just going to colour the whole work. And we've
Yeah.
both done that today.
Lesson
We didn't
learned.
plan this, promise.
I don't know. We really didn't. I don't think I would deliberately write something bad for this.
We fucked up independently, thank you.
Yep. Anyway, so thanks for listening, and
Thank you for joining us, guys.
we're nearing the end of season 4 now. It's getting there,
Good grief.
and then we've got some exciting things happening in the future. So watch this space, and let us know what you think. And if you want to take a crack at writing like C.S. Lewis, it's 800 to 1,500 words. Send it over to us, and we'll read it. Give you some feedback.
Right, get out of here, you young whippersnappers.
Get out of here. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For magnificent beardery, let's cast the Chinicus folliculale spell on Gary Laird. For rich ginger tones on the scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?